You guys are going to be, you're going to in for a treat. I'm going to tell you right now. I'm sitting with a man who looks younger than he is. He's a father of three, ages 18, 20, and 26. He's also a grandfather. But Mike Norton has not only great experience in having been LDS, but he has the most unique exit from it and what he has spent his time doing since he's left. And this guy's kind of a walking encyclopedia of insights relative to the LDS temple. Some of you, because you've already emailed me, might know him as NewNameNoah. And all of the information that he's put out online, let's see, he has 70 videos. He has 4,708,000 views. He has in 215 countries. So perhaps if anybody's had a influence on keeping people out of Mormonism from joining it in the first place, recognizing it as a cult, because it is definitely a religious cult, and is able to help people see the frank idiocy of it, it's this guy. So as we've been doing through the shows, we've been learning about where people came from, what their early religious upbringing was, and then we'll let Mike kind of take us in from that. So my brother, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Go for it. Born, raised, mom and pop, sisters, brothers, Mormonism.
I was, as they say, born in the covenant. I was born in 1968, raised in the church. In fact, I'm a big history buff, and I, as a Latter-day Saint, I was always proud of the fact that I was baptized on a very significant date. I was baptized 4 days after my 8th birthday on July 4th, 1976.
Oh, wow.
The bicentennial.
Huge day.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I remember my dad saying at the time all the fireworks and the big celebration across the country was because I chose to be baptized. Obviously, he was pulling my chain there, but yeah, I was born and raised in the church. I grew up in a church when we would go to church literally 3 times a week. It'd be twice on Sunday. You go in the morning, and then you go home, and you come back in the afternoon. And then you had like primary during the week. Although I don't recall what day of the week primary was, Tuesday or Wednesday. But yeah, I just remember we'd go several times a week. I went to the seminary when I was older. Had a happy, healthy, normal childhood. Grew up primarily in Southern California. Moved. My parents got divorced when I was like 12, and me and my siblings stayed with our mother, and we moved to Colorado. It should be noted because it'll definitely come up later in the story that I had. As a child, I had an interesting hobby. Barcodes came out in the mid-1970s, and I remember as a child being fascinated by barcodes. I, to this day, say I really don't have a lot of talents. I don't play any musical instruments, can't really sing, not much of an artist, really. With the exception of barcodes. As a child, they came out in the mid-1970s, and when they came out, I remember going shopping with my mom and watching the checker scan these barcodes. And so one day I peeled a label off like a can of peas, and the next time we went to the store, I asked my mom to get a can of peas. We go to the check stand, and as the checker's scanning everything, I said, "Wait, can you scan this instead?" And I had actually taken a ballpoint pen and had, by hand, meticulously hand-drawn this barcode. I copied a barcode by hand. I had a ruler, and I'm doing this. And so I hand this guy my hand-drawn barcode. He runs it under the scanner a couple times. It doesn't work. And then on the third swipe, boop, can of peas, 98 cents. I'm like, sweet. And so I tried to perfect that skill as a child. Barcodes fascinated me. And that was something that I did for a few years as a child, and then I just kind of quit doing it. And that'll play later on in the story here, but I had a happy, healthy, normal childhood. Living in Colorado as a teenager. I actually attended Columbine High School back well before the incident. Went to seminary. I actually rather enjoyed it. This is in Colorado. When you went to seminary, you would go to your local chapel at 5:30 in the morning, to some horrible hour, and half the time you'd pull up 2 chairs, one for you, one for your feet. Sometimes you'd be wearing your pajamas, or you'd bring a blanket. The teacher would bring donuts on Friday. I really actually enjoyed it. I moved to Utah when I was 17 years old. At the age of 16, I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, which basically meant that I would look for excuses to not go to church, because like any normal teenage kid, going to church for 3 hours on Sunday isn't exactly something that you look forward to.
Right.
So I was working Kentucky Fried Chicken as a kid, and every single one of my friends and coworkers smoked cigarettes, and so I started smoking cigarettes as a 16-year-old, and I had a brother who was attending Utah State University in Logan, Utah. He came out to Colorado to visit. It took him all of 30 seconds to realize Mike is hanging out with a bunch of dirtbags. All these kids smoke. I mean, these are the scum of the earth. So he convinced our mother to allow me to move to Utah with him, so he'd kind of get me on the path to the straight and narrow. And it worked. I actually moved to Utah. He used a story that his roommate moved out. He couldn't afford to pay the rent on his own, and so he needed me to move out to Utah with him, get a job so I could pay half the rent. It was all a sham, just to get me under his wing and get me away from these friends I was hanging out with. And it worked. Moved to Utah, quit smoking, started going back to church and all that. And I'm 17 and 18, and met a girl, fell in love. 19's coming up real quick, and back then, this is 19 was the age you go on a mission. And I almost didn't go on a mission, frankly, because I lacked confidence in myself, and I feared that I would be called on a foreign-speaking mission, and I feared that I wouldn't be able to learn the language. It really was just a lack of confidence in myself. I prayed about it. In fact, I remember distinctly, I was in the parking lot of the Logan Temple, and I felt an overwhelming, frankly at the time, I would have described it as an overwhelming spiritual experience. I felt like that the Lord definitely wanted me to go on a mission. I did. I accepted a mission call. I went to the California Ventura mission, and it would be an understatement to say that I was as passionate of a missionary as a Mormon as I am for the truth as a former Mormon. And I'll give you an example. My very first area, so I went to the California Ventura mission. My first area was Bakersfield. I said to my training companion, why don't we go down to this Baptist church down the street and ask the minister if we can teach his congregation what Mormons believe? Because he's going to do it. I mean, this is in the mid-1980s, well, it's 87, and it was not uncommon for Baptist ministers to have a lesson on what those pesky Mormons are going to try and tell you when they knock on your door. And so I figured, let's give it to them from the horse's mouth. In fact, I even remember I don't remember the name of the church, but it was a Baptist church, and the minister's name was Garth Black. My companion and my companion thought I was nuts. But he's like, all right, whatever. So we go to this church, and basically I just told the minister, a lot of churches like to educate their congregation on what Mormons believe, and sometimes they get the facts a little off, a little wrong. So we were wondering if you would allow us to teach your congregation what the Mormons believe. I mean, I was looking back on it now, I laugh at my naivete.
And your zeal.
Well, yeah, I mean, I figured, Parley P. Pratt and Heber C. Kimball, those guys were teaching congregations. Why can't we? And Mr. Black, Garth Black, politely declined our invitation. But it wasn't the last time I would try that. So every area of my mission, I served in the San Fernando Valley. I served in Northridge, California, Moore Park, California. I served in a little town outside of Santa Barbara. And everywhere I go, we would find the local, usually the non-denominational and or Baptist churches. We stayed away from the Catholic churches because we knew the Catholics weren't bothering with us. We wouldn't bother the Lutherans or the Methodists, but those darn Baptists, we knew they had a jonesing for the Mormons. So we would make a point. I made a point of taking all of my mission companions to the local churches in the area. And in my last area, Thousand Oaks, California. My second to last companion, his name was Jeff Adams. I don't know if he'll ever see this, but Jeff Adams was honestly one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. I told him a little story. He's like, yeah, I'm down for it, whatever, you do the talking. We go to the First Christian Church of Thousand Oaks, and I gave the same spiel to the guy, let us teach your congregation, all that, and he says, I don't see why not. That would be a lovely idea. And I looked at my companion, he looks at me, I looked back at the guy and I said, we have a lot of information to share. We might actually need 2 Sundays. So he says, I think we could do that. Okay, all right. And I'm like, well, let's pin him down. And I'm like, how about next Sunday and the Sunday after that? And he said, well, so we worked it out. And sure enough, just a couple weeks later, we were scheduled to teach, not his entire congregation, but we were scheduled to teach his entire adult Sunday school class what the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints teaches. It's the First Christian Church of Thousand Oaks. I'm sure they're still there. Nice people. So we taught the first discussion to him the very first Sunday. And then Elder Adams got transferred, and I get a brand new companion straight out of the MTC. And I'm telling him as we're driving back to Thousand Oaks from Ventura, where the mission home was, that what our schedule was like that week. I'm like, well, let's see. So on Tuesday, we've got dinner with the Cranmers. On Wednesday, we're teaching the second discussion to Bob Johnson. On Thursday, we won't have anything. Let's see, Friday, Saturday. Sunday, we're teaching the First Christian Church of Thousand Oaks Sunday school class. Monday is, and he's like, we're what? He was British, by the way. Yeah. Nice guy, Greg Freeman. He was a little, as the British say, gobsmacked.
Yeah.
He said, you're pulling my leg. And I said, I do a horrible British accent, but I said, no, actually, we taught them last Sunday, and we gave them all Book of Mormons, and we're teaching them again this coming Sunday. I said, I don't know what they taught you in the MTC, but around here, we teach congregations, Elder. And just, I said it dead straight face, and we did. It was literally the highlight of my mission.
You look like you enjoyed the mission. Your face kind of glows as you talk about it.
I did enjoy it. I'm not going to say I was a perfect missionary. I got in a little trouble at the very beginning of my mission because I felt like as a representative of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we needed to know what the enemy was saying. And the enemy was the rest of the world. There was anti-Mormon literature out there. And frankly, some of it was a load of crap. I will specify one very specific example, and I will strongly encourage the man to challenge me on this. There's a book called The God Makers, Ed Decker. Ed Decker, if you're watching this, in my opinion, which relieves you of any legal liability, in my opinion, Ed Decker is a liar, and his book, The God Makers, is trash. And there's a reason why the book, The Truth About the God Makers, which I think you can still buy in bookstores, is twice as thick as the Godmakers, because in my opinion, the Godmakers was nonsense. It painted Mormons out to be literally Satan worshipers. They're worshiping Satan. And I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I was born and raised in the church. I'm pretty sure if I was worshiping Satan, I would have known it. And it was just trash. So I learned what the anti-Mormons were saying about us, but I didn't want to support them financially. So I would send them letters and I would say, I'm thinking about joining the Mormon church, and is there any chance you'd send me a copy of your book? And they would. They'd send them to me for free, typically. There was a company, I think they're still in business, called Firefighters for Christ.
Oh, yeah.
Mormon missionaries, so at least back in the 1980s, we would send them a letter requesting copies of their cassette tapes. We would then record over their cassette tapes and make recordings and send them home. So I would do audio recordings to my girlfriend and I would send them home to her on Firefighters for Christ audio tapes, usually the anti-Mormon ones.
Yeah.
But I got to know the anti-Mormon literature inside and out. I kind of became the unofficial mission apologist. I was the one, when somebody had a question about some anti-Mormon information that they didn't have the answer to, they'd call me. I'd get phone calls from sister missionaries that call and say, Elder Norton, is it true that Joseph Smith said there's men living on the moon and they're dressed like Quakers and they live to be 1,000 years old? And I would say yes, he did. But then I would give an explanation as to why he said that, and I'd put it into historical context, and then they would go to their investigators and say, okay, well, here's the explanation. Did Brigham Young say there's men living on the sun? Yes, he did, but let me explain why. So I got really good at rationalizing, and frankly, I got pretty good at being an apologist for the church.
So you obviously have a love for truth. When you're doing that, you're still a truth guy.
Absolutely,
you're a truth guy.
Absolutely. As they say, the truth shall set you free.
Yeah.
I was passionate about the truth, and I called a lot of these anti-Mormons on the phone. How I got their phone numbers, actually, because this is before the internet. This is the 1980s. I called Sandra Tanner, Gerald and Sandra Tanner, and told them, I'm thinking about joining the Mormon church, and what can you tell me about it? And can you, next thing I know, I've got Ed Decker's home phone number, and Walter Martin, the Bible Answer Man, and Chuck and Dolly Sackett, and Granny Greer, and Ed Decker, and Dick Bear, and all of these anti-Mormons. I had their home phone numbers. So I started calling these people and telling them, hey, I'm thinking about joining the Mormon church. Can you send me some of your materials? And that way I'm not supporting them financially, but I'm getting their anti-Mormon literature and studying it. But there's really just one that frankly frightened me. I got a copy of Mormonism, Shadow or Reality by Gerald and Sandra Tanner, and I probably got about 10 pages into that book, and it scared me. It scared me bad, and I put that aside. Well, one of my phone calls was to Dick Bear. I believe he was one of the co-producers of the movie The Godmakers. And Dick Bear called back. I left a message. He called back, and somebody answered the phone, one of the missionaries in our apartment, and he says, he asked for Mike Norton. And I got on the phone, and he says, Elder Norton? And I didn't know who it was, so I said, yes. And he goes, I knew it. Yeah. He said, you are a liar, and I'm gonna tell on you. I'm gonna call your mission president. How dare you waste my time with this and all that? You're a Mormon missionary. And he did. He ratted me out. Dick Bear called my mission president, basically said, you got one of your missionaries calling me, pretending to be an investigator, and I got read the riot act by my mission president.
Interesting.
It did not stop my desire to learn their ways, but I definitely avoided Gerald and Sandra Tanner's stuff because it just scared me.
Jump ahead with me. Don't want to prolong too much because we don't have much time, but Came back, got married in the temple.
Got married in the temple 6 weeks after I returned home from my mission to the girl that I fell in love with before my mission. Had 3 kids with her. Was still an apologist. Ed Decker came on tour, on a little speaking tour in the early 90s in my town in Logan, Utah. And I contacted his ex-wife and got some dirt on him because, like a good little Mormon, I didn't attack the message, I attacked the messenger. So I showed up at the church where Ed Decker was preaching and put little flyers on the windshields of all the cars in the parking lot, basically saying, I don't remember what I was saying at the time. I think it was essentially saying that, he had an affair on his wife and multiple affairs, and he wasn't paying child support, and it was personal character attacks on Ed Decker. It wasn't his message; it was him personally. And then the next day, he went to Brigham City, and I followed him there. And that's when Ed and I kind of got into it a little bit. He called the police on me. The police basically said, he's standing on the public sidewalk handing out flyers. He's not breaking any laws. You got a problem with it, sue him. He threatened to, and I said, bring it on. He never did sue me.
You're proactive.
I was a passionate Mormon. I mean, as a missionary, I'm going to churches, teaching congregations, and when I got home from my mission, if some anti-Mormon came to my town, he's going to have me to deal with.
So what happened?
Flash forward to around September of 2001. I was making good money, very good money. I was pulling in about $200,000 a year, and I wanted to find a piece of art to hang on my living room wall that would combine my love of the church with my love of history. And I thought of a perfect idea. I'm going to buy an original Mark Hoffman forgery. And for any viewers that don't know who Mark Hoffman is, Google him. He was a member of the LDS Church in the 1980s. He conned church leaders out of hundreds of thousands of dollars by selling them forged documents, including the infamous Salamander letter. I had a budget of about $10,000, so I figured I'm gonna find a Mark Hoffman forgery. So I go online, I Google Mark Hoffman forgeries for sale, and I didn't find one, but instead I found a website, Dr. Shade's page on Mormonism or something like that, made by a guy named Jason Galantine. And I'm reading this story, and it was a story of the Kinderhook plates. And for your viewers that aren't familiar with the Kinderhook plates, in a nutshell, Kinderhook is a town near Nauvoo, Illinois. A couple of guys decided to con Joseph Smith. They made some bogus little plates, some little brass plates with some chicken scratches on it, and, dug them up, and somebody, of course, said, hey, the Mormon prophet can translate that. And the next thing you know, these plates are in front of Joseph Smith, and he says, and I believe the exact quote was, as he's looking at these plates, I see they contain a record of the man with whom they were buried. He was a descendant of Ham, through the loins of the Pharaoh, and he received his kingdom from the ruler of heaven and earth. And of course, all the Mormons are like, yay! And of course, the Times and Seasons, the Mormon newspaper, had a picture of I don't know what they call it, lithograph or whatever, of all of these Kinderhook plates on the front page of the paper, and a local newspaper said, this is going to be nothing short of a sequel to the Book of Mormon. Well, Joseph Smith had a habit of dragging things out because he had to keep fleecing the flock. And so, for example, when he got the Egyptian papyrus that was used to create the Book of Abraham, he took years to translate that because, whenever somebody would say, well, what's the prophet working on now? He's still translating away on that papyrus, and boy, he's almost down to that. He just drag it out. He can't just crank it out 1 week because, the next week they'd be saying, well, what have you done for us lately? So as long as he would say, I'm working on this, then it was fine. Well, Joseph Smith got killed before the Kinderhook plate translation really ever got off the ground. Mormons to this day will say that he really never showed any interest in it. And at the time, as an apologist on my mission, I was familiar with the Kinderhook plates. I knew the story but I knew the church's version of the story. I didn't know the real version. The church's version kind of glossed over a very important fact that bothered me, and so I decided to go online and investigate it and find out a little more about this. And the more I investigated, the more I realized, oh my gosh, Joseph Smith, he lied about this. But I rationalized it as a Mormon. I figured, you know what? Maybe Joseph Smith was killed because he was about to translate and release the Book of Kinderhook. And so maybe God took him off the earth to prevent him from doing that. And so that's how my Mormon mind rationalized it, was he didn't translate it because God wouldn't allow him to, therefore the church is true and it's okay. But I felt like, it just kind of stuck in my craw, and I thought, I just need to dig a little deeper and make sure that this was a one-time isolated incident and there's not multiple things that he translated that were bogus. And I thought, the most obvious thing might be the Book of Abraham. I mean, the church had essentially the papyrus that was found in the 1960s. And so I went to Deseret Book, and I basically said, because I didn't trust the anti-Mormons, I'm not going to trust Sandra Tanner, for crying out loud. She's an anti-Mormon. So I went to Deseret Book, and I basically said, I want to buy anything about the Book of Abraham, the Pearl of Great Price, the papyrus. If it has anything at all to do with the Book of Abraham, I want to buy it. And I bought all these books and stuff, and I spent literally weeks reading everything. I mean, I was self-employed at the time. I told my employees essentially, you're running the business, I'm busy, I got a project here. I spent about 18 hours a day, literally every day for weeks reading. And the more I read, the more I realized, oh my God, he made it up. The Book of Abraham, he made it up. The evidence was so overwhelming that I couldn't deny it. And I would challenge any Mormon who watches this, you've got to dig into the Book of Abraham. I went on to the Doctrine and Covenants. I got out the 1833, from Sandra Tanner, got an 1833 photocopy of the Book of Commandments. And the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, next to the 1984 Doctrine and Covenants, all three of them. And I'm literally reading verse 1833, 1835, 1984, and the more I read, the angrier I got, because I realized he just changes everything. I mean, he says one thing in 1833, and 2 years later, he's totally reversing his stance and changing it. Is this how God works? Does God give a revelation and 2 years later changes it to suit his needs? I realized quickly that the Doctrine and Covenants was a sham. And the last thing was the keystone of my religion. I investigated the Book of Mormon, and I got a photocopy, you can buy them online, a photocopy of the 1830 Book of Mormon and the 1984 copy of the Book of Mormon, and I'm comparing them, and I'm digging deep, and I'm looking at the archaeological evidence, the geological evidence, the botanical, zoological, linguistic, genetic, all of the evidence. Literally every single field of science told me this isn't true. And at the time, I still believed in the Bible. I consider myself a Christian at the time, and of course there's that verse in the Bible that faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. Well, what I hope for is the truth. And I felt like evidence that I can see shouldn't be trumped by evidence that I can't see. And I prayed and I fasted, and I had not only an overwhelming, scientifically backed testimony that the church was not true and the Book of Mormon was bogus and all that, but I had, at the time as well, an overwhelming spiritual testimony as well that it wasn't true. And I remember saying to my wife, we're driving down the street. I hadn't said anything to her. I'd been studying, reading for weeks. Driving down the street, and I knew when I said what I was about to say to her, that our lives would change, because people get divorced. You know, you tell your wife, I don't believe the church is true anymore. Yeah, they'll divorce you.
Sure.
So we're driving along, and I said to my wife, as we're driving, I'm driving, and I said, what would you say if I told you, and I took a big breath, and I said, that Joseph Smith was a pathological liar and the church isn't true. And I just looked straight ahead. I didn't even dare look at her. And we come to a stop sign, and I turn and look, and she has tears streaming down her face. And she says, why would you say such a thing? And I said, because the church isn't true. And Joseph Smith was a pathological liar. And she was like, go home. We were going out to dinner or something. We turned around and we went home, and I sat down with her, and I poured out all the evidence, and we talked for like 3 hours. And I showed her everything. You know, I told her I've been reading. And she's like, what have you been reading? Everything. I've been reading everything. And the church isn't true. Let's Kleenex there, would you? As a lifelong member of the church, to say that that was devastating to me would be an understatement. It was the worst thing that had ever happened to me in my entire life. And yet I knew it was true. I knew that the evidence showed that the church was not true, and I knew that what I was telling her, that Joseph Smith was a pathological liar, I knew I was right. And it took me literally 3 hours of showing her evidence, and she was convinced. She was like, oh my God, you're right. I mean, to say that we lived in an LDS community would be an understatement. Her parents, or Mormon as they come, Mike and Carol Lee Salveson, two wonderful people, lived right across the street from us. Her uncle, Richard Salveson, and his wife LaDawn lived next door to us. Another uncle lived across the street. Their grandparents lived across the street. My entire family was LDS. Her entire family was LDS. I got 3 brothers that went on missions. And it was devastating. But I knew, once I knew the church wasn't true, not only would I not continue to support it financially, I was done. I mean, at the time, we were teaching the Gospel Essentials class in church. My wife and I were co-teachers. This is a class, the Sunday school class for new members and investigators. And I went to the bishop and I said, with a list of 29 concerns, and I said to the bishop, number 1, I need all of these questions answered. I need an answer to all of these, or the church isn't true and we're leaving. Number 2, you need to get somebody else to start teaching our Sunday school class. And he said, well, I'll get somebody, within a couple of weeks. And I said, let me rephrase. If we teach the Sunday school class next week, I'm going to teach them what I know. And he says, we will have you replaced immediately. Smart move there. He did not have answers to my questions. And on January 6, 2002, it's Fast Sunday, I went to church that day, got up, bore my testimony. I talked about Christ. I quoted a scripture in the Bible, a passage about how I think it was Jesus Christ himself saying that I don't bring peace, I come with a sword or whatever, and I'll turn mother against daughter and father against son, and didn't say anything about Joseph Smith, and finished my testimony, and I went and slid a 8-page letter underneath the door of our bishop, slid an 8-page letter under the door of our stake president, basically saying, take our names off the records of the church. It's not true, and these are the reasons why. And the bishop and stake president came to our home that night. The stake president said, well, here's a problem. We may have to actually, instead of honor your request to resign, we may have to excommunicate you.
Wow.
I said, really? Well, what's the logic behind that? Well, because we didn't just give a copy of the letter to the bishop and the stake president. I went around and tacked one basically to the front door of about 40 members in the ward.
Proactive.
Our home teachers, our family members, her aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody in the ward anybody that I knew in the ward personally, I put a copy in their mailbox or on their front door.
Wow.
He said, well, because you went around and you spread this letter everywhere. And I said to him, is there anything in that letter that is not true? And he looks at the bishop, and the bishop looks at him, and they both kind of go, well, no. I said, so let me get this straight. You're telling me you're going to excommunicate me because I'm spreading the truth. Well, you're saying that the church isn't true, and you're saying that this is evidence that the church isn't true. And I said, the church isn't true, and it is evidence. And he said, well, and that's the problem. And I said, okay, let me make this easy for you. This is January 6, 2002. I said, before today, I've shown that letter to 3 people. 2 of those 3 people have already left the church. So you wanna play hardball? I'll tell you what. I went in the other room, came out with a stake directory. And I said, if you don't honor my request to leave the church and resign, I'm going to hand deliver a copy of that letter to every single person in this entire stake. I will be your worst freaking nightmare. So you go ahead and you call Salt Lake and get back with me on this and let me know, okay? So he did. And they came around to seeing things my way. Oh, okay, we'll go ahead and let you resign. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and be their worst freaking nightmare anyways. Now, that was in 2002. 2005, back in the 90s, I used to be a private investigator. For several years, I was a private investigator, and one of my specialties was surveillance. Undercover surveillance. I would spy on cheating spouses, and I was pretty good at it. I also did a little work for the state where I would investigate workman's comp fraud cases and all that. And so it started in 2005. I wasn't recording with cameras, but I heard online that they were making some significant changes to the washing and anointing ceremony on January 18th, 2005. So that day, I went to the Jordan River Temple, and I went to the washing and anointing, the initiatory, did washing and anointings. My plan was I was going to pretty much memorize the new script, and instead of doing that, I saw this thing that said study booth. And I'm like, oh, it can't be this easy. I walk in the study booth, and there's 2 guys sitting in there with laminated copies of the new script of the washing and anointing ceremony. So I just asked this guy, excuse me, can I see that for a second? I look at it and I said, oh yeah, you know what? I think this verse here in Deuteronomy is wrong. Is there a Bible around here somewhere? And he said, oh yeah, there's one out there. And I just stepped out of his line of sight for 2 seconds and walked straight out of there, went home, and I had the new changes to the washing and anointing ceremony, which basically meant, hey, no more naked touching, on January 18th, 2005. Within hours of the changes taking effect, I had them posted online on my website. And I also gave a copy to Sandra Tanner, and she had it online and all that. And 5-6 days later, 2 nice men from church security showed up at my house with a letter saying, essentially, you're no longer welcome on temple property, and if you step foot on temple property, we'll have you arrested for trespassing. And I laughed and told them to get off my porch or I'll have them arrested for trespassing. That was 2005. Flash forward to 2011, the GOP candidate for president of the United States is Mitt Romney, a man who has sworn an oath to consecrate all of his time, talents, and everything that he has or ever will have to a cult. And I had a real problem with that.
Before you go on.
Yeah.
I just want to point something out which you may have observed, and that is, I didn't know this about Mike, but he just shed tears. This is a man who is passionate about being LDS, and he was defending it. He wants truth. He is doing everything, and when that rug was pulled out from under him, the reason I'm making this point is because I think because what he does now is viewed as kind of distasteful by some. And he's not boastful, but he's direct. It's him being burned. he knew he was literally burned. He's a man of passion. He's a man who wants truth. And when he discovered he had been burned, he just took that same passion that's his and has thrown it back into the institution that really has been lying to him and lying to all of us. And so I think we need to go easy on Mike with what he has done. He really hasn't changed as a human being. He hasn't become this person. The LDS Church had the benefit of a passionate man in their clutches, and they couldn't hold him because they weren't true. So now he's out there doing with the way I believe God made him, with that passion going after the truth to expose them. So I think we need to, as a group, I don't know what kind of heat he's taking, but I'm sure he's taking it. The ad hominem attacks on his person and the way he is about it. Just look what his history is and what he's come through before you pass judgment. So, 2011.
2011, Mitt Romney is the presidential candidate, essentially. In 2012, the GOP president, there was a realistic possibility a Mormon could be the next president of the United States.
Yeah.
And I was not going to do nothing about it. I knew that I could do something about it. I mean, I went into the temple. I keep in mind that in 2002, when I left the church, I started giving out temple recommends. Back then, there was no security on the temple recommends. It was just a piece of paper with a date stamped on it. And, they didn't have computers in the temple. They'd scan them and all that. It was just a piece of paper with an expiration date on it. And so I got a copy of an original temple recommend and just went to the Kinko's and made a color copy of it and started giving them out. And I would give them to unworthy Mormons who just wanted to go see their kid get married in the temple, but they couldn't afford to pay tithing.
That's awesome.
Because, because what would Jesus do? Of course, he would prevent somebody from going to see their kid get married if they didn't pay enough money, right? Isn't that? Yeah. So I gave, so far since 2002, I have helped, I kind of stopped counting around 220-ish unworthy people to attend the wedding of one of their loved ones, usually their own children. Wow. Well, in 2006, they changed protocol. I used to work for the church doing security in the Logan Temple. And a friend of mine calls me that still worked for church security, and he said, well, do you have any idea how much you've just cost the church? And I said, how so? And he said, they've changed the temple recommends, and they've added a security measure. And I said, oh, yeah, what did they do? And he knew my history as a child and all that. He was a good, close friend. And he said, they added a barcode. And I said, well, isn't that inspired of them? I said, a barcode, huh? And let's just say, I won't say how, but for several years, I would actually continue using the same template that I had, but I would all I needed was a membership number. If I knew somebody's membership number, I could hand draw a barcode on a temple recommend that it would pass muster. And I just had to get their membership number, which is relatively easy to get. So for years, I was making hand-drawn barcodes on temple recommends. And then I quit doing that because it's just so much easier. People are leaving the church in droves to the point where I just put a message out on the message board and I say, hey, I need 5 temple recommends for these people, in 2 weeks. And I have, non-believing, closeted Mormons, people, when I say closeted, I mean, they still attend church because they have to, because their family, wouldn't support them if they left. And they just either give me or loan me their temple recommends. And so I've been giving temple recommends to people for 15 years now to help them to go see their kid get married in the temple. And in 2012, I used one of those recommends actually, went to the Jordan River Temple, and I recorded the temple endowment ceremony. This is a ceremony where Mormons learn the secret handshakes that they believe are required to gain entry into the kingdom of God.
Just really quick, where can people see that?
If you go to YouTube and you type in NewNameNoah, it's NewNameNoah. YouTube.com youtube.com/NewNameNoah, and that'll take you to my channel. I'm on Twitter @NewNameNoah. My email address is NewNameNoah@yahoo.com. I make no secret of who I am and what I do. In 2012, I posted a video online called Behind the Veil. I posted it online 3 weeks before the presidential election, and it's almost to 2 million views now, but a vast majority of those views were literally in the weeks leading up to the 2012 presidential election.
Wow.
And we all know now, Mitt Romney, lost by a relatively small margin. Now, I don't think that my video necessarily did it. I'm sure it may have influenced some people.
Contributed.
But in 2012, I posted Behind the Veil. And in 2013, the church started changing the ceremonies again. The endowment ceremony, in most cases, is just a movie. You go and you watch this movie, and it's on my YouTube channel. In 2013, they changed the movie. They really just redid it. Same script, but they made 3 different versions of it because I think they didn't like the fact that the only version they had in temples was on YouTube.
Wow.
So they made 3 new versions of it, and I'm like, well, I got to go back. Got to get those on video now. And then I started thinking, you know what? I never recorded a sealing ceremony, a temple marriage. I never recorded the washing and anointing ceremony. So I made a rather elaborate plan, and last year, starting on April 10th, 2016, I disguised myself rather well, I think, and I attended a ward in Arizona for 84 days under an assumed name. I was using somebody else's identity. I won't say whether I was using it with or without permission. That's for church security to figure out. Figure that out. Ask Elohim. And I attended this ward for 84 days. On day 24, the bishop signed the temple recommend and handed it to me. On day 35, the stake president, actually his second counselor, signed that temple recommend and handed it to me. And so on 35 days into my 84-day little infiltration, I had a temple recommend signed and handed to me by bishop and stake president. Now, by the way, I made a little docu-series, I call it, of this. I made a video called Behind the Veil 2, Further Light and Knowledge. I posted that video on the 4th of July, 2016, which was 40 years to the day after I was baptized. Well, this coming Saturday, on September 23rd, 2016, which will be the 30th anniversary of the day that I walked into the missionary training center. That's the day that my mission started, September 23rd, 1987. So 30 years later to the day, I'm posting my personal favorite episode of the making of Behind the Veil 2. And it will feature my temple recommend interview with the member of the stake presidency. He was also in my ward. He usually sat right in front of me in the high priest group. I even put on the screen a little, I call it a lie-o-meter and a discerno-meter. And it keeps track of how many times I lie and how many times he catches me in the lie. Because let's face it, if you're a stake president, you should have, or a bishop, you should have the power of discernment.
Sure.
The Lord should tell you, this man's lying. I mean, didn't the Apostle Paul have a situation like that where somebody tried to pull a con on him and the spirit of the power of discernment told him, no, this guy's not on the up and up. Well, watch episode 11 and see if my stake president had the power of discernment.
Fascinating.
Spoiler alert, he did not.
Wow.
So it's a fun series. I actually, my very first day back into the church, keep in mind, April 10th of 2016, I hadn't stepped foot in a Mormon chapel in nearly 15 years. And for 84 days, I was essentially a faithful, active, tithe-paying member of the church. I had a home teacher. I had a calling. I went to the temple religiously. Wow. I went to the temple from day 35 to day 84, I think I attended the temple 17, 18 times.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What was inside you during those 85 days that was pushing you to get this done, to get it on tape? I mean, truly, what's the motivation behind Mike Norton to get this whole thing done?
I make my videos for three groups of people. 7.5 billion prospective converts to Mormonism who deserve to know what they're getting into. Mormons who have never been through the temple because they're either not old enough or they don't pay tithing or whatever the reason is, they haven't been through the temple yet. Mm-hmm. And the third group is faithful, active Mormons who've been through the temple. They know exactly what goes on in the temple, but they have this belief that God would not allow for somebody like me to go into the house of the Lord. Mm-hmm. I refer to it as the International House of Handshakes, and do what I did. I mean, I was in the what's the name of that temple today? Ochre Temple.
Yeah, I guess.
Church security really ought to check the cameras. I was in the Ochre Temple today. No power of discernment. Look at this. There's no disguise. Nothing whatsoever. There's nothing they can do to stop me from going in the temple, except if they're in tune with the Spirit of God. If they truly are the only true church of God on earth, and if they have the Spirit, which they believe they alone have the ability to actually give as a gift. I mean, Mormons believe that anybody can be influenced by the Spirit. You can feel the promptings of the Spirit, but only the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has the authority to actually give you the gift of the Holy Ghost. The audacity of that is astounding. And so I ask faithful, active Mormons, where's your power of discernment? How is God allowing, I mean, all it would take is one person out of all the dozens and dozens and hundreds of people that I have talked with in the temples over the last 15 years. All it would take is one single solitary person to be in tune with the Spirit and have that still small voice say, this man doesn't belong here. They call the police, I get arrested, problem solved. But they don't have the Spirit.
Nobody at the temple checking it. Nobody at the veil taking you through. None of the members, not the stake president.
I have worked as an ordinance worker in the temple. In 2013, I manned the recommend desk in the Salt Lake Temple, and I was the one checking the recommends as they're coming in the door. And at one point, this party comes in, and the last guy in line, his recommend wasn't good. It was invalid. I just let him go on through. I mean, I didn't care. I figured he's here to see a wedding or something. Who am I to tell this guy, sorry, you're not worthy to enter the house of the Lord. Meanwhile, I'm not even a member of your church. No, I let him through.
So for the three categories, the motive from Mike Norton is you want people that they have the truth.
The truth. I mean, Mormons will say what goes on in the temple is sacred. It's not secret. It's sacred. I'm going to have to call BS on that. When I was 19 years old, back before they removed the death penalties from the temple, they removed the penalties in April of 1990, I literally put my hand to my throat and swore an oath that I would never reveal what I was doing in the temple, and rather than do so, I would suffer my life to be taken. And I also pantomimed slitting my own stomach. I pantomimed ripping my heart out of my chest. Don't tell me it's not a secret when you've got people swearing an oath to never reveal what they're doing. Now, granted, they took out the death penalties, but if you asked a single, solitary, faithful, active, temple-going Mormon today, hey, tell me in a whisper. Let's go in the chapel and you can tell me in a reverent whisper what goes on in the temple. Can you just confirm for me that this is, in fact, the second token of the Melchizedek priesthood, the patriarchal grip or sure sign of the nail? They won't do it. So it's not secret, but it's secret. Yeah, they hide it from people. I mean, let's face it, nobody in their right mind is going to join the Mormon church if they tell them up front, oh, by the way, eventually you're going to have to wear special underwear that will protect you from Satan. You'll have to learn special handshakes that Joseph Smith stole from Freemasonry. And, oh, by the way, the magic underwear, you can only buy them from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's ridiculous. I mean, who in their right mind believes that in order to go to heaven, you need to wear specific underwear, you need to learn sacred handshakes, and give 10% of your income to a multi-billion-dollar corporation that spends those sacred, precious funds on a multi-billion-dollar shopping mall in Salt Lake City with a gigantic glass retractable roof. Would Jesus Christ, if he was on the earth today, spend billions of dollars on an upscale shopping mall with a retractable glass roof? Anybody that believes Jesus Christ would do that clearly knows nothing about the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Seth, how are you? All right. It's been too quick. In fact, I hope we can get Mike back. I wanted to say something. I'm going to let Mike wrap it up, but I have moved away from a lot of the apologetics toward Mormonism because I'm viewing the Christian faith in a different way. But everything he has said here, I applaud the guy. I think he's ballsy. I think he is causing real eye-opening things to happen against that institution, which I still detest. And so I applaud his courage and his drive. Before you give your final closing statement, which we ask you if there's anything you want to share, what are you doing now in terms of the faith, if any? We've had atheists, we've had everything.
I believe in God.
Okay.
I do not profess or proclaim to believe what kind of underwear he wears. I don't even know if God is a he or a she or an it. Although a majority of the Bible I do not personally believe, there are many aspects of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the core essentials of the teachings of Jesus Christ that I absolutely believe in. I believe you should love your neighbor, you should love yourself, and you should love God. And I believe 1 John 4:8, God is love. Right now, the most important message I could share would be just love. There are thousands of children in this country right now that are Mormon, and they belong to the LGBTQ community. And their church belittles them with their doctrines, with their words, and dozens and dozens and dozens of these children are committing suicide because their own church leaders make them feel worthless. And a perfect example is that Savannah, bless her little heart, 12-year-old child gets up and pours her heart out to her congregation and just says that, you know what, she's gay and she believes that God loves her and wants her to be happy, and she wants to get a job and have a significant other and move on in life. And they turned her mic off and told her to sit down. And that little girl sat down and sobbed in her mother's lap. And that is not a gospel of love. That is not what Jesus Christ taught. Not only would Jesus Christ not shut her mic off, he'd have been washing her feet by the time she finished. And I may not identify myself as a Christian, I do believe in God, and I believe that God is love, and I think that we need to love each other. You know, the old saying, what would Jesus do? Jesus would love you no matter what you were, no matter who you were, whether you're a prostitute or a saint or sinner. It doesn't matter what it is or who you are. The gospel of Jesus Christ is about love.
Amen.
And we're all equal in the eyes of God.
I sense that even what you're doing is motivated by love, Mike, because the truth is very closely connected to real love, and I think it's a remarkable thing. Any final thought, or was that the final thought?
Just for anybody who has loved ones who are Mormons, that you want to help them see the truth, that Mormonism is a cult, rather than go to them and say, this isn't true, go to them with legitimate concerns. CESletter.com, if you can put a link to that on there. CESletter.com is a spectacular resource for Mormons truly investigating the truth. If you want the truth, look for it, because if the Mormon Church is true and you look for the truth, then your beliefs will be confirmed. But if you truly are looking for the truth, maybe you'll find out that the church isn't true after all. That's what I did.
Appreciate it, my brother. God bless you, and we'll see you next week here on Heart of the Matter.
I'm on a ride, going nowhere. I am an existential cowboy on the wind, and I won't be coming out, I'm going in. This man's awake, a storm's arising, the dawn's awaiting till 100 monkeys know. And I can feel the light-filled monkeys start